A round of applause, Aurora Kagawa-Viviani.
I was just trying to match all the other bios that I saw listed on the Purple Prize website, and I didn't realize you were going to read the whole thing. Sorry, just arrow? Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, let's not look at a big picture of me. Mahalo for joining me here today. This invitation to Keynote was a real honor because I've been kind of a secret, enormous fan of Purple Mai'a for years, even though I never showed up to anything. But this week, my grad student chronic imposter syndrome kicked in because Alec and Kelsey had reached out a couple weeks ago being like, oh, we really liked your essay. Can you keynote? And I was like, the last time I gave like a really public presentation was 20 years ago. And the rest of the time, I like to kind of hide behind the scenes or talk to classes, much smaller rooms. And it was a struggle because I felt compelled to speak on Mauna Kea, but it's a very difficult subject, I think, for a lot of people, including myself. And the essay I wrote in July was sort of written in a state of frustration, fear, hope, like a real emotional mix. And yet we're now in September, and things have changed. And so the challenge is to, like, what oratory ho'okupu do I have to offer all of you as innovators who are doing really incredible work, and yet in light of Mauna Kea? And so the theme I came to was that in this moment where I think it's occupying a lot of our consciousness, we have to understand, what is Mauna Kea demanding of us in the present moment? What are we needing to learn in this moment, and how does that inform where we go forth? And so while everyone, or many people everywhere are trying to figure that out, I'm at UH Manoa, I see people struggling, students, administrators, what to do. Today is a day to highlight all of you folks and think about how this connects. And I'll go back to UH because that's where I've spent a lot of time. There's, we have to acknowledge there's a tangible fear that many researchers have that this is the end, that the struggle for Mauna Kea signals an end of astronomy in Hawaii. And I'll say, as we know it. And yet many friends and family for me who are outside of my university bubble are experiencing this movement led by Kia'i as an incredible moment of healing, growth, and reconnection. So in today's talk, I kind of was thinking, well, what do I say? And I'm like, okay, they're calling this day Kilo Hōkū. Like, okay, there's something there, because, the literal translation is astronomy, but then navigation too. It brought me back to the concept of pānānā, and which I'll describe later. And as a Hawaiian in the sciences, I want to talk a little bit about the contact zones I find myself in. And I'm conflict averse, like many people in Hawaii. Like, I hate it. Like, anyways, better, you just sit there and not say anything. But, at this moment, it's in front of us. So I'm also intellectually fascinated by it. And so at these edges, at these sort of zones of contact and chaos and tension, new opportunities emerge. And so what does this conflict reveal to us? And what are we, all innovators in different spaces, social engineering, software engineering, what are we being called to do upon in these times? Not just for Mauna Kea, but climate weirding. If you guys were at the climate strike yesterday, growing economic disparities, forced migrations, global unrest. What are these times demanding of us? So I really like this picture I took many years ago because, there's what you see and there's what you see there. But this concept of Kilo Hōkū, in trying to figure out what to say to all of you guys, I'm like, okay, Kilo Hōkū. I am not a Kilo Hōkū practitioner. But I reached out to 2 young Hawaiian women who have been trained in very different schools of Kilo Hōkū. So on Thursday, I met with Dr. Haunani Kane, a navigator and geoscientist who raised Rapa Nui on the worldwide voyage. And she studies atoll formation and climate change. And she helped me find my way up to morning protocol at Pu'uhonua o Pu'uhuluhulu this past Thursday, my first actual pilgrimage there, even though I wrote. And I have felt like consciously connected for a while. And we caught up eating boiled eggs in the back of her truck about being Hawaiian in the sciences. And we also then attempted to follow along and learn a new hula, or new to us, from Kaumakaiva, barefoot on the increasingly hotter asphalt, and when I have not done an ONU for over 10 years. And my point is that we are trained in the sciences, but we're not necessarily, Renaissance people. And Haunani is, actually. But that afternoon, we returned to UH Hilo. Haunani had to go process her samples. And I met up with Dr. Heather Kaluna, a Kapoho-raised astronomy professor, for coffee because we had met over a Skype call, and I was in town and wanted to say hi. And also, Haunani and Heather are going to be on a panel together at the upcoming SACNES meeting. And so it was good to meet face to face. And we talked about not stars or navigation or Mauna Kea, but families, mutual friends, fishing, lava flows, changes to pohoiki, pigs in the yard, sweet potatoes. And it was surprisingly normal. And as we split, I'll admit I was totally bummed that I had no deeply profound Kilo Hōkū, like insight bombs to then bring to this talk. And I was flying back to Oahu, and it took me hours to realize, like, maybe I was looking at the wrong thing. Because all along, Mauna Kea has been catalyzing connection and reconnection. One of the exchanges we had while I was in Hilo was with my friend Linnea, and she had sort of in reflection been saying, never before has there been access to this kind of cultural learning, connecting to the language, hula, history, an older way of being, that we might call kapu aloha. Never before has there been access, not just for Hawaiians, but anybody who shows up. And another friend, Kajihiro, eloquently describes the pu'uhonua as, quote, a kipuka aloha aina, a space of emergence, new politics, new realities, new possibilities, a new world in the making. It is not lawlessness that some have tried to portray it. On the contrary, the pu'uhonua is lawful, 2 L's. It is an alternative governance based on the ethics and discipline of kapu aloha. So returning home Thursday night, I was like, okay, it's about the connections. And I realized I could talk about Kilo Hōkū not as some distant objects, not as like outside of my expertise, but from my own particular pānana. I can tell stories from my own experience, what I know, what I've done, what I've seen, the people I've heard and inspired me, the paths I've been navigating, the objects I study. And so the pānana, as we might think about Kilo Hōkū as navigating to new futures, we all observe our hōkū from different metaphorical pānana. And I got this word from a friend, Luca Mossman, who was returning from a trip to Mokumanamana with the Edith Kanakaole Foundation Papaku Makavalu crew, I think led by Auntie Kale Nu'uhiwa, who is like sort of supreme practitioner of Kilo Hōkū. And he was describing how they were searching for the pānana. I don't know about if it was for this pahumanamana or what, but and they were there on Kealapolohiwa Akane, the summer solstice, because that is kind of a key turning point. The sun's at its northernmost extent on its track, and I could imagine, maybe not real, but this is what I imagined: the Kilo practitioners walking around, bending, peering, figuring out, okay, what side of these uprights do you stand, or where was that platform where the Kilo was watching, so that when the sun set and the stars rose in the eastern sky, they lined up, and which were those constellations that were lining up with those uprights? and what did they signify? Why was that built? So my panana is not here, but was spending time in the dryland field system of Kohala, where I really learned a lot. Like, I grew up in town, went to private school, was really nerdy, still am really nerdy. But being out here, and my job was to run field experiments for Stanford project and be outreach. And I'm, like I said, I'm townie. So I was getting schooled in rural living. And I had a lot of time to watch the clouds, as you know, Kiana mentioned Kilo, right? You just sit out there and I'm literally watching plants grow. But what I learned from there, because in every little, here in Kohala, there's like, it's a big field system. I think it's more than 15,000 acres the last time I checked, because the LiDAR reveals more, but there's tiny little narrow ahupua, and every ahupua has unu, like a small altar. And we're part of probably some organizational system that I'm not sure I fully understand, or we still understand, because this has been a pasture for over 100 years. But there, you can see there's no streams. And so it's all rain-fed, and you have to know the skies if you're gonna plant and expect to eat. And to Kilo Hōkū, and not just watch the stars, but the moon and the suns, is to understand seasons and timing. And heiau, we're meant to capture the time charted by these moving celestial bodies. So this guided planting and field management decisions, social exchanges, such as when Makali'i, or the Pleiades, rises as the sun sets, you know Makahiki begins. And so say you're at Kukani Loko on a day like tomorrow, you also know that the sun will be setting over Ka'ala as the sun moves on its southernward journey, marking Pikoa Wakea, the fall equinox, and a time of rebalancing. And so when we find our panana, because it's not always about where the stars move, but where you stand to make sense of it, we are in alignment with the forces that guide our decisions, and in those places we understand our respective kuleana. And so I sound kind of like I'm going off the metaphysical end, but think about that. It's where we stand so that those things make sense. And when we are in those places that we know we should be in, we know what we need to do in this moment. I've seen a lot of people struggling to understand kind of Mauna Kea, and it's like, no, you have to maybe not necessarily be there, but know where you are. So for me, I live at the contact zones. As a Kanaka scientist, I exist at the margins, sometimes the margins of my own community, also at the margins of my disciplinary community. And beyond that, I work at interfaces. I see and chase gaps. I was at Manoa when the GMO Kalo conflict blew up. My mentors were both in CITAR, and we're holding the ku'i at the Capitol and testifying, so you have people in your family on both ends. And when conflict erupts between worldviews, I found myself in translational roles as other Kanaka who walk in different worlds. Our disciplinary communities, our communities of origin, that oftentimes never interact except through us. They can't see each other, they can much less understand each other, much less empathize. And in these spaces, I've watched Kanaka scientists who I pay attention to struggle, as I have for myself, with inner conflict and tension, with our sense of complicity in activities that would appear to undermine one community or another. And yet, in these moments of conflict and tension, our ability to peer into diverging worldviews reveal opportunities for change. And I like to hike, so I think about it standing at Wa'ahila, and I can see both into Manoa and Palolo, but it's because I'm standing in this intersection. And the challenge is to see through the conflict and correctly diagnose the underlying problems that we're not addressing. These moments also demand us and others who believe in transformative change to really rise to a higher level of creativity and innovation, much more than we're comfortable with. Like, for instance, me being here is me attempting to get way past my comfort zone, because I think it's necessary in these times, and kapu aloha is a good guide. So what conflict teaches us is that there's something wrong with our design, and I think no other community But the entrepreneurial design community really understands this. The DT folks have a healthy philosophy on failure. Fail often and early, fail fast, but learn faster. Failure and conflict are things, as I mentioned, we fear in Hawaii, but DT folks remind us that this is a critical part of learning, that iteration process. We need to redesign. And what are we learning from Mauna Kea? So this is where we were in 2015, right? And here we are in 2019. And it's not that the conflict doesn't exist, but new possibilities, as Kyle mentioned, emerged. And so I wish I could leave this on longer, but I will have another slide, because we have to think about history. And before I was born, Koho'olawe was being bombed. By the time I was a senior, pili bales and mycorrhizal inoculation of seedlings were being deployed to revegetate the island. And there was a lot in between. But one of the things I really appreciated, having been to Koho'olawe several times, is you know what I remember is that hali line, like when you're trying to get your ukana back on the island, and well, of course you snag it and everything gets soaked through the 3 layers of plastic bags, but just that connecting to each other and working to each other, and that's what it takes. So where was I? This was all happening on Koho'olawe, but back home, new generations were being raised in Aloha Aina. After I graduated from high school, I won't say when, but you can guess, the charter school movement exploded on the scene. And we're now at a stage where Purple Mai'a and all of you folks are leading efforts for indigenous innovation and tech, building a base for students to learn and be very skilled at programming, and then setting also the leading edge with Purple Prize, creating hybrid spaces with provocative thinking and exposure to things like Alec told me, equity-centered community design and DT. So I'm a big fan of DT. And I think my exposure to tech from being at MIT a long time ago was things were starting to turn from high tech to appropriate tech. And I think more and more people since then have been pushing it further. But right, can we use design to redesign systems of injustice? I don't know. And how would we indigenize design thinking in ways that address some of the things that really aren't on this chart yet about values and history? So, they always say necessity is the mother invention, but community capacity and will, like what we're seeing now with Mauna Kea, is also necessary for implementation and movement. And on the ground, the networks being established at Pu'uhuluhulu in person or online, in new generations of justice-oriented astronomers, new connections among the Hawaiian diaspora who are finding their way home, are creating new realities and worlds. And I don't know where it'll take us, but I'm not fearful as I was in July. I'm excited about the possibilities. And so when I wrote, science and culture have long coexisted in Hawaii through the archaeological alignments in Mele, Lo'i, Mala, Loko'i'a, shorelines carried on Va'a, restored in forest, shared from one person to another through stories, exchange, and webs of relationships. I'm left thinking that, maybe not all of our tech is in our older structures, but really in Pilina. And Mauna Kea reminds us that kapu aloha is a necessary social technology for reestablishing Pilina relationships and connection. And so, you guys are doing a lot of app development. I would challenge us all to think about what other forms of tech, if kapu aloha is social technology, what other forms of tech might be part of the solution to rebuild Pilina and connection in these times, locally but globally. And does this run the other way? Is Pilina a necessary kind of foundation for design and redesign of our systems? And because aloha aina is a loaded word, it would be interesting to see, and I'm excited to see, what does aloha aina-centered design and innovation look like? So I guess with that, I'm looking forward to learning from all of you folks today, from the teams, and listen to the exchanges during breaks and in the hallways. Thank you.